Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narrative Innovation Showcase 2021. My name is Matthew Weiss.
I'm Clara Fernandez-Parra.
And as always, we're here to highlight people and projects that are working at the cutting edge of narrative design. This year, we have 4 recent games that we feel are pushing the art of narrative design forward in exciting new ways.
So let us tell you a bit about the format of the Narrative Innovation Showcase. We take a problem solution approach, whereas the creators here have tackled a variety of narrative problems from design to technology to story development. And we would get a glimpse of the process and how they solve these problems. We have 4 exciting indie games that deal with a range of topics and different stories that include time travel, language, Elizabethan dialects, dementia, and comparative puzzle solving. So it's quite a variety. We hope that you find them as interesting as we do, and we'll be back at the end for a brief wrap-up with some takeaways. Without further ado, let's see what our presenters have to say.
Hi, my name is Nina Rotea, and I am the co-founder and one of the developers at Other Tales Interactive. It's now been 2 years since we released our studio's first game called TikTok: A Tale for Two. And TikTok is a 2-player co-op adventure game played on 2 screens. In the game, the players need to work together in order to solve the mystery of a clockmaker's missing sister. Besides talking about how we designed the game focused on encouraging player communication and collaboration, I'll also look at what we've learned during the very special year that was 2020. How's the game been played? What have we learned from our players? And how can we think of bettering our design in future projects? Before I talk more about these points, I'd like to tell you a bit more about the game itself, how it came to be, and what our thoughts were when we made it. And TikTok: A Tale for Two is a game that is played by 2 people on 2 devices. It's a narrative-driven puzzle game where the 2 players see one half of the puzzle on each screen. In order to solve the puzzles and the mystery presented, the players have to talk to each other and explain what they see. When they start telling each other what they see, they learn about what the puzzle is that they need to solve, and they also learn more about what happened to the 2 sisters in the game. It's a game about a clockmaker who wanted to control time and her search for her sister. Players play as themselves, and they play through a set of puzzles created by the clockmaker. TikTok: A Tale for Two is a game we made because we wanted to create a narrative that 2 people could experience together. Me and Tanya Tancred, my co-worker and co-founder, love playing digital narrative games together, and we were feeling that there was something missing from the market at the time. We were playing games together, but we weren't both actively playing at the same time. And that's what we focused on when we started making TikTok. We wanted to mix these narrative games with our experiences with physical escape rooms, where we both had the possibility to have equal agency. And this is the first commercial game that me and Tanya Tancred have made, and we knew pretty early on that what our strengths and limitations were as developers. We took the time to get better at the things we didn't know as well as others in order to create the experience that was starting to form. I focused on programming, and Tanya went into full drawing mode. Due to many reasons, and one of them being the fact that we started making TikTok on a boat in the middle of the ocean with no Wi-Fi in sight, we decided to make the game non-networked. We therefore had to come up with a design that allowed 2 players to interact with each other in a way that they felt like they were actually connected. We needed to make a game that was designed with the purpose and intention of the players being the bridge between the 2 devices instead of any internet connection. We started making this game as part of our master's thesis, and we came up with a design framework for how we wanted to build our game, and also for how we wanted our players to experience the story. We've revised this a million times while making our game, but the keyword shared is our go-to word when deciding. We divide up the narrative onto the 2 devices. We make sure that the players both have agency, and we split the puzzles up into 2. We looked at a lot of physical escape room as an inspiration for the game, and it's also interesting to look at how that is in the light of the pandemic. This is interesting to see how we made a game that works similarly to an escape room, but is possible to play remotely, where players are not in the same room together. I'd like to tell you about how the design of TikTok and how we use what we learned from physical escape rooms to create something digital. And the most important for us when it comes to creating a 2-player narrative game is that you give both players the same goal. In TikTok, both players are presented with one half of a newspaper clipping that describes the event of the missing girl, the clockmaker's sister. With this small introduction, the players are thrown into the game with something to hold on to, something that motivates their existence in the world, as well as their narrative reason to keep solving puzzles. This is also done in some physical escape rooms. The game starts with an introduction of, for example, what has happened in the room before you enter it, the bomb has been hidden, or a burglary has occurred. The escape rooms that I appreciate the most are the one where the story is honored throughout the experience. When an escape room briefing tells you that you need to figure out who broke in and stole a diamond, its puzzles should ideally revolve around that. Investigate footprints, analyze the strand of hair, and so on. In other words, you can use the puzzles to tell part of the story. And in TikTok, we divide the story of the game up in two, but that doesn't mean that the players get two completely different stories. That would also confuse their goal. Instead, the two players get parts of the story in different ways. Important events are repeated or continued on the other screens, for example. And as much as the story is divided in TikTok, the puzzles are also split up onto the two devices. And the structure of the design tells the two players that they have to cooperate and describe what they see in order to solve the puzzle. The game is played by two players, and they're both equally important. The design of the game relies on the player needing each other. One can't take over and play for the other. And escape rooms do this really well because many times the players physically have to be in two places in order to solve a puzzle. And they're therefore also designed with the intention that more than one player is necessary and needed. So what have we learned from last year? Very early on in the development of the game, we intended it to be played on mobile only, with two players sitting in the same room. We later decided to release the game on as many platforms as we could, which we believe has been one of the things that has helped our sales. And what we've seen during the pandemic is that a lot of players have played TikTok from their homes with other players in their homes or just in different locations. We believe that this is both due to the limitations of being physically together during 2020, but also the fact that players want to connect with friends and family that are based in different parts of the world. One thing that we know is that the sales of our game went up remarkably during these times, and we believe that this is due to the way that the game is designed, with the game being accessible on many different platforms, the simple connection between players, and the fact that the players get to work together to solve puzzles and experience an adventure together, no matter where they are in the world. Both games like ours and network games like Among Us, Deep Rock Galactic, for example, have succeeded in making people feel connected even in times where they could not physically be together. So what would we do differently in the future? So what did we learn last year that will help us better our design in the future? So first, a bit of context here. We are now working on a new two-player adventure game that is also focused on player communication and collaboration. When we made TikTok, we looked at physical escape rooms, and our original plan was to make a game that would be played in one room. And what we learned last year was that most of our players were playing TikTok from two separate locations. We're now taking that into consideration when designing our new game. We want to share with you what we learned from one of our new inspiration sources, digital escape rooms. We learned how well it works when players are encouraged to divide up information amongst each other, when players get time to discuss what they experienced in order to learn more about the nuances of the story, and how to utilize the fact that the players are controlling, or at least able to interact with, a screen each. And according to us, the best and most exciting digital escape rooms are the ones that are quite different from their physical escape rooms counterparts. They're the ones that are designed with new affordances in mind that comes with working in other medium. You're probably not going to be in the same room together, so you can't physically go to two different parts of the room and tell each other what you see or learn there. You don't have that natural division of one person going here, one person going to the other part of the room. And if you want your players to experience something similar, you have to create an equivalent of that in a different types of space, like on two computers in two different locations, for example. And that was our challenge when making TikTok, and now we're looking at it more intentionally when designing our new game. In TikTok, the players were whisked away into two separate and isolated clockwork worlds instead of sharing the same space. In our new game, the two players will get different roles, which also help create another type of division. Another thing that has become apparent while playing these digital escape rooms is that there are different types of players. There are players who want to solve things quickly and are happy just to learn the broad strokes of the story, and players who want to take their time to observe, learn more about the story, and discuss the next steps. For us, that makes our design choice to split information up between the two players an important element to keep. We want to make sure that both players get time to together decide what will happen next. If one player would have access to all information, there's not always a need for the second player, and that is something we really want to avoid. This knowledge also helps us create the experience that we want to make, a game with strong focus on the narrative for both players. We've also come to love digital escape rooms that don't have a time limit. It allows for those players who want to take their time to do just that, but it also allows for those players who want to solve things quickly. And each pair of players get to, together, choose their pace. And our intention with TikTok was to create a game that allowed for that. We also added things in the game that the players could discuss, things that told more of the story. For example, the books hidden inside a locked cabinet in TikTok tells more of the story. It doesn't have anything to do with the puzzles. It's just an additional piece of storytelling. Something some players will notice and some won't. And the game can be solved with or without this piece of information. And we'll look at including more of these story elements that are open for interpretation and create a different experience and discussion point for each player pair in our next game. However you want to play the game, the most important thing for us is that you're connected to each other. And that's the last thing we learned from digital escape rooms. And also from the response that TikTok has had, the value of playing games together with your friends even when you're apart. Whether that is due to a global lockdown or connecting with friends far away, it's really cool to be part of an industry that gives players more of these narrative experiences. And thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please reach out to me on any of these platforms. I'm happy to answer or just chat about co-op, narrative, or puzzle design things. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Catherine, and I'm going to be talking about language as a world-building device and how we did this in Astrologaster. So Astrologaster is a comedy game about being a medical astrologer in the time of Shakespeare.
Well met, Mistress Payne. How fare you this day?
Most well indeed, sir, for I am just come from taking my niece on an outing to Tower Hill. 'Twas to see the execution of the traitor Robert Devereux.
Ah, yes, Lord Devereux. What a tragic end to a promising career.
And such a lovely beheading they gave us. My niece and I very much enjoy the hangings at Tyburn, but a beheading is so much more elegant, is it not? Verily, 'tis a better class of execution, I find, and the royal executioner did go down on Devereux with such skill. A single stroke was all it took to give us the traitor's head.
Aye, 'tis true the royal executioner gives excellent...
But I have no time to tarry here and gossip with you, Dr. Foreman. I am come on a matter of great concern, and I bid you do my reading with greater care this time.
So that was an excerpt that gives you an impression of the language in the game. And I appear to have started to replay it. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to move on. So the challenge I'm going to talk about is how to get the most out of your game's language in terms of world building. This is especially relevant when you have a narrative-heavy game where you have a lot of dialogue, but maybe not so many visual tools to help convey a strong sense of the game setting. For example, you may have a very limited set of animation and art to help you. And this was the case with our game Astrologaster. We had a lot more words than art. So our specific challenges within this context were to leverage language as much as possible to give the game a distinctive and historical flavour, while at the same time still being accessible to modern ears and still managing to achieve distinctive character voices. And this can be a challenge when characters are speaking in a way that's a bit foreign to the audience. And finally, we wanted to be able to use adult humour while staying within a wide age rating. So the typical approach to language in historical or historical fantasy settings seems to be to use modern English and dress it up with some archaisms. There are exceptions to this, but this generally seems to be the approach taken. So I think the writer's goals here are fairly modest, basically to make the language easy to understand by the audience while maintaining their suspension of disbelief. So the audience understands what these characters are saying, while at the same time they're able to believe at an aesthetic level that the characters in that world genuinely talk like that, even though they don't. For this to work, what you want is for the audience to not really notice the language much at all. And this approach works this approach to historical settings certainly works, and pretty much everyone does it. as far as I can tell, but it leaves language relatively underexploited. So in Astrologaster, we wanted the language to do more for us and do more heavy lifting. So our approach was treating language in a similar way to the way you might come up with an art style for a game, an art style that suits the specific needs of the game in terms of tone and mood. So for this, we created a sort of bespoke game language. This comprised a limited selection of grammar rules and patterns of speech and vocabulary drawn from early modern English, which was the kind of English spoken in the time of Shakespeare. And these rules were chosen because they give a strong flavour of early modern English, while at the same time they're quite easy to understand for modern audiences, and they're rules that give a light enough touch not to make the language too heavy and too pompous sounding. So you can sort of compare this to maybe choosing a limited colour palette for your game, but for language. So to familiarise the player with these rules and these unfamiliar words, we repeat them a lot and we use them more or less consistently. Another thing I mentioned earlier as part of our challenge is with using historical language in Astrologaster was the challenge of creating distinct character voices. So for this, we had a subset of rules and vocabulary that were particular to gender and class. And these ideas were primarily drawn from the historical class and gender differences in the language at the time, so this required research. A lot of these differences are very subtle and probably register on an unconscious level with the audience. But again, the aim is that with repetition and consistency, these finer details add up to a sort of an overall unique feel to the sound of the character. This isn't the only way we denoted class in the game, and I'm going to talk about that next. So one of the things writers seem to do when dealing with historical subject matter is they apply some kind of modern framing so that the audience can make sense of the material. For example, how does an audience distinguish between an upper class and a lower class character in a world that's very different from their own? Well, one of the ways these kinds of distinctions are made clear for the audience is by mapping the class differences in terms of modern accents and speech patterns onto the historical characters. We wanted to take a fresh approach to this. Also, I personally tend to think that if you're going to apply a contemporary lens to character speech, it may as well be genuinely contemporary, of course, if it suits the game. So, for example, for our most working class London character, in Astrologaster, we chose not to do the usual thing of making him sound like a 20th century Cockney. Instead, he presents or he speaks a blend of pseudo-Shakespearean style English with modern working class London English integrated into that. And in linguistics, they call this a sociolect called MLE, Multicultural London English. And one of the cool things about MLE is that it shares a few interesting features in common with older English. So we were able to play with some of those similarities. Another thing we do in Astrologaster is we do make use of some contemporary slang. A lot of period drama does this as well, especially in the case of profanity. So the profanity has the same force of impact on audiences that it would have done during that historical time. And a famous example of this, if you know the TV series, it's cancelled now, but the TV show Deadwood, they used the word cocksucker a lot. It works rather well. But instead of mainstream profanity, we went for slang that would be more familiar to gamers and very online people. Partly because online slang is very much less expected in this early modern English context. And also it seems to weave in well with the very colourful, creative insults that were used in Shakespearean times. So instead of trying to hide the fact that our game's language is full of historical anachronisms, which is usually what you're supposed to do, we treated these elements more like a feature, not a bug. And here's a demonstration of the sort of MLE-ish character.
Sooth, I am glad the cochineal beetle treatment proved efficacious.
I'm not so sure I am, innit? My newfound loveliness has stirred a passion in Mistress Burbage. She's been trying to move to me.
On my word. But surely, Mr. Bell, if Mistress Burbage's attentions occasion you discomfort, you have merely to tell her so. Make it plain you wish your relationship to remain professional, and bid her abstain from any amorous advances.
You what? Nay, sir. If I air her, she'll be vexed, and I could lose my job. Know you what I mean?
So our approach draws attention to the language and brings it into the foreground of the game a bit more than you'd usually do in a period setting. Instead of trying to minimize the unfamiliar and anachronistic elements of our character's speech, we sort of leaned into them and found ways to manage them. There are, of course, trade-offs to doing this in terms of the audience's suspension of disbelief, but our approach suited the style of our game. Finally, historical language, to be honest, was extremely useful for us in a comedy game like Astrologasta because it gave us a lot of scope to use an approach that I like to call family filthy. If you've played our game, you'll have noticed that it contains a lot of adult humor, but it contains no words that would technically be considered offensive today. So we have archaic vocabulary, which passes under the ratings radar. We also use some made-up words and online slang, which also passes. So effectively what we were doing, sort of creating a dictionary of lewd words and expressions in the player's mind. And we did this by applying our general principle of using the words repeatedly and consistently in the hope that the player will infer and learn their meanings. So, for example, say you want to make a dick joke. Not saying you do, but maybe you do. And you want to use an archaic word for penis that nobody's going to understand, you can just you can foreshadow the dick, as it were. What I mean is you use your archaic word several times in different contexts first, so that when it comes to making the joke, the audience knows what you're talking about. You're talking about a dick, if that's not clear. So takeaways. So the main takeaways, I guess, are there's no single one-size-fits-all approach to language in historical settings. I think language is typically underexploited. And especially in games, because, you know, we every game is different and we're working with very different materials. I think there's room for innovation and bespoke approaches in what we do. I think creating your own approach can add freshness and originality to the texture of the game, but this requires a lot of research. And I think research is the key to discovering fresh and original ideas in general. And likewise, it goes, I mean, it's the same thing with finding new ways to present historical material. So in summary, consider using language as part of your world-building toolset. Thank you. You've been a wonderful audience, but that's probably because I can't see you.
Hello, my name is Shella Ramanan and welcome to Breaking Borders, which looks at the challenges of making Before I Forget, a narrative game about a woman with dementia. Right from the day we met and later formed Threefold Games, myself and Claire Morwood knew that we are excited to explore areas games don't typically go. We wanted to make games about the otherwise untold stories. Before I Forget started in 2016 as a game jam game, exploring the theme of borders. It came out in July 2020 and was nominated for a BAFTA this year in the category Games Beyond Entertainment. In it, you play as Sunita and walk through a house that begins in grey monochrome. You interact with objects, and these trigger memories for Sunita, and colour bleeds into that part of the world, gradually filling the house with colour. Here's a trailer to give you an idea of the experience.
Is this the right place? Dylan will know. I'll find him. I got caught in the rain that day in the park. But you offered to share your umbrella. We walked slowly, even though the rain got heavier.
So, what am I looking at?
The Andromeda Galaxy. It's 2.65 million light years away. My Leela auntie used to tell me the stories of the gods and the stars, but I can't really remember them now. What did I come out here for? Dylan?
Sonny! Sonny, come look at this!
Where would you go if you could go back in time?
I'd stay just here and now.
The challenge, apart from getting from slide 2 to slide 3, the challenge was making a game that is both an engaging experience and something that represents dementia respectfully, as opposed to offering a distorted or cliched perception of this disease. Memory loss is the symptom we all associate with dementia, but as we started making the game and researching the disease, we discovered that everyone's symptoms are different. So how were we going to represent that varied experience? And did we want to make it fun? So the first solution for us was to focus on character. We wanted to make sure we told the story of a person rather than a victim of a disease. It would have been easy to slip into a dark place tinged with horror, but horror and sadness is not the whole picture. Popular media tends to represent dementia as a purely bad experience, but sometimes it's funny. Sometimes it's sadder for the people watching the dementia sufferer change. Regardless, we wanted to tell the story of a person, not a disease. The fact that Sunita has dementia when players meet her in the game is secondary to her rich life and personality. Playing with frustration. Dementia creates a disconnect between the person who is living with the disease and the people they are leaving behind. They forget conversations and people, and it can be scary or frustrating. Scary is something games are happy to delve into, but frustrating is something we try to avoid as game designers. Challenging, yes. Frustrating, not so much. But frustration is actually a key part of the experience of dementia, so we try to lean into that in places. The goal in Before I Forget is to find Dylan. You discover who Dylan is as the game unfolds. But sometimes Sunita forgets that that's the goal. So the goal is to find Dylan, but this looping GIF shows a moment where Sunita needs to find the toilet, but she's forgotten where the bathroom is. So every door the player opens leads back to the closet. So this is one of our solutions, was challenging player expectations. So this moment of trying to find the bathroom is utterly relatable. We understand Sunita at this point. We don't ever want to be in that situation. And that's why it's powerful and memorable. Players at events would ask, so how do I win? And how do I get there in time? And the answer is, sadly, you don't. You don't win at dementia. So this moment challenges the idea of games as spaces where you become more competent as the game progresses. The opposite is true of dementia, and we saw that as an interesting way of exploring player expectations of the power fantasies that they normally deliver. So going back to that idea of disconnect between the person with dementia and the observer, our realities are not the same. They may not even be experiencing the same moment in time. They may be seeing or hearing things. To ensure we were using this aspect of dementia intentionally, we mapped the player versus Sunita's emotions in this spreadsheet. So we measured Sunita's anxiety from calm to panicked on a scale of 0 calm, 10 panicked, and the player was rated from 0, which was happy, to 10, which was sad. And this helped us control the pacing of the game and decide where to put certain objects to trigger key moments. For instance, Sunita is content as she sets the table for 2, but the player is sad because they know Dylan isn't coming. Or she reads a letter and Sunita is, fairly calm about it, but maybe confused, but the player is at 7, so they're actually quite sad. So the goal is to find Dylan, but sometimes Sunita forgets that that is the goal. And sometimes she wants a cup of tea instead, but her dementia can obstruct her ability to do something that simple. So to represent that, we disrupted space for players. Sometimes doors don't go where you expect them to. Sunita also exhibits compulsive behaviors, which we've used to sometimes clarify the player goal of finding Dylan, but other times we use it to represent Sunita as an unreliable narrator as a result of her dementia. She may repeat something or misunderstand where she is. We also use full flashbacks as Sunita relives earlier moments in her life and the house changes to a different time period and sometimes a different layout as seen in this GIF. And some memories are just voiceover and represent memories more as we know them, as something in our head rather than full hallucinations. So one of our solutions was research. So we worked with 2 medical professionals, which we found through an organization called Gaming the Mind. It's a group of psychologists who are interested in the ways games intersect with mental health. We met 2 doctors. One was specialized in dementia and Alzheimer's, and they'd both play different builds of the game over several months, giving us feedback and ensuring that our portrayal was clinically sound. As a direct result of working with these doctors, we also found ways to use dementia symptoms to solve other game design problems, such as we have a black hole, a rug that appears as a black hole to control the player pathway. And as the writer, I also edited the way Sunita refers to objects. So people with dementia would remember the function rather than the form of an object. So I edited something that began, that was a watch, that began as round metal objects. And after the doctor feedback, I changed that to that timekeeping thing. So their expertise was inspiring rather than limiting what we could and couldn't do in the game. And it was invaluable. So the takeaways. We made a short game about an Indian woman who is a scientist, a wife, a daughter, a friend, and someone who had dementia. Her story is just as vital and engaging as the all-action hero. Making Before I Forget underlined our belief in the value in small, intense experiences. Even 6 hours is a hurdle to access for some people, but an hour is short enough for someone to try a game for the first time. And that's what we found when we released Before I Forget. When it came to representing dementia, we researched the disease and then focused on the character. This led us to explore parallels and divergences between player and character emotion, using the character perspective to inform gameplay. We also challenged player expectations by using Sunita's confusion and anxiety as game design pillars to subvert the power fantasy, but still tell a powerful story. Thank you. I hope this helps you explore new perspectives in your games.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carlos Rocha, and I'm the founder of Dreams Incorporated and one of the co-founders of Seek Games, and I'm also the lead narrative and game designer. And this...
If you saw what was, what is, and what would be, if you knew how it ends, would you change it? Could you make the hard decisions? And would you be strong enough to fight? If you learn from the past and act in the present, you can rewrite the future.
And what you just saw was the launch trailer we hopefully should have been shown earlier today, July 20th. We're very happy because ever since we first showed the game at E3 in 2019, we've won a lot of awards even before it came out. People have been able to play and have loved the game. And it has garnered a lot of hype around the media. And we're extremely excited to be showing this to the world now. But I've not done this alone. I have been very fortunate to count with extremely talented people that have worked on much bigger games and have a lot more experience in narrative design than I do. And they have helped me gone from a simple idea to a very well-written story, at least in our opinion. But it's not the first game that I've worked on that has a lot of words. Actually, we worked on Heimbrick with my previous company. And if someone wants a very innovative and weird experience, I would recommend it to you because it's a very special son that I had before Chris Sales. But this is about Chris Sales and telling tales through time. And this was very difficult because we had this really interesting idea. I came up with this concept, this mechanic of seeing the past, the present, and the future at the same time. But this had a lot of problems to tell stories with this mechanic. So how do we encompass everything that we want to say? How do we maintain stability and harmony? The answer to me as a game designer is having a central philosophy. In this case, learn from the past, act in the present, create your future. Everything follows this simple axiom. And this is how it looks. So you can see how in real time everything changes. Looked at through these crystals, looked at through these cristales. But let's look at how it began. In the past, this was just a mechanic. So we were learning, okay, with this as a main mechanic, it wasn't really an RPG, although a lot of people think it was, but it just started as a simple seed. It just started like a tech demo. You didn't play it, you just watched something interesting. So we needed something that followed that mechanic, a story that could potentialize everything that could offer. And there were a lot of possibilities because we had time travel. So of course there had to be possibilities, and we needed a frame to tell that story that we wanted to tell. At the beginning, it didn't have words even because I was so tired of words. So we had pictograms. We abandoned that idea very early on. But then we needed that framework to work on. What was that framework? We ended up working with this genre, with the JRPG. Why? Because I felt very comfortable talking about JRPGs. I love the classics. I loved Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI. I loved Super Mario RPG. So it was very nostalgic because it evoked those classics, but it was also very innovative. Of course, the central mechanic, it permeated everything. So we tried to tell stories highlighting how every NPC would change, how every object would change. So with this evolution, with this in mind, we had a very powerful storytelling device. We could even use it for enemies as well. In the same fight, you could see enemies from the past or from the future or even from the present, and with the big difference that they would behave differently. Maybe in the past, they were faster, but they were weaker. In the future, they were not as strong, but they used magic and they were slower. In the present, they were at the peak of their physical prowess, but they didn't have any magic either. Or you can see enemies completely different, where they had a lot of energy in the past, but that energy was being lost as time went by. But the interesting part was how to tell stories with this and how you could help people or leave them be. You can see this young musician trying to make a living with his art, but he finds social rejection in the city he finds himself in. So you can just leave him be, and the social rejection could get the best of him, and you can see it in the future. But if you help him, if you support him, you can create a different future for him. So your actions actually make a difference, and you can see that change immediately. That's the powerful device that we have, increased sales. And we tell little stories with every NPC, with every object. You see where they were, why did they become the way they are now, and what will they become. You can see that in very different possibilities. But this is not only the thing that we want to say, we also want to leave a lot of what we are saying to the people that will come after us. And it's not only about this mechanic itself, but it's about what we're saying. So the interesting part is that we created this concept called endemic fantasy, which is basically fantasy that's made up out of Colombian culture, customs, colors. We're thinking about why everyone in the world knows sushi, why everyone in the world now knows what Dia de los Muertos is, but no one knows what Dia de las Velitas is. There are a lot of Colombian customs that people don't know about in the outside. So we want to show why we think Colombia is magical, why we think the way we dress, the way we behave, the way we think, it's different and it's special. We want to show how we can turn this 5-colored lake into this incredible dungeon. We want to show how these floodings in some cities can turn into a mechanic in some towns that could even end up turning into absolutely flooded cities in the future. Or we want to show how a salt mine that was turned into a cathedral can turn into actually a salt cathedral within the game, because these are all real places in Colombia. And also, this incredible and emotional part of who we are here, it's based around our Catholicism. The majority of Colombians consider themselves Catholic, and that has been part of our lives. Even if whatever we believe in doesn't matter, because it has permeated all of our lives. So we wanted to make that part of the story. We wanted to make that part of everything that you went through in this story. And this story, it's about a pilgrimage. It's about finding new cathedrals and seeing these different stained glasses, getting new powers out of that fate. So with this, you can see the stained glasses representing the fate of the lady, which is a fate that we created for this game. And it's what can be created with this idea of coffee causing haste to your characters, or this golden poisonous frog used as a mentor for yourself, with, of course, the nice top hat. We want to start or participate in this movement that could mirror the magical realism back in the day. We also try to make an effort to help other developers and try to help them grow and innovate in several parts. And hopefully you will try out this game and you will enjoy it and see if we accomplish our goal. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So that was a lot of in-depth information. Now we're going to give you a brief summary of some of the core ideas that have run through all the presentations.
Okay, so first of all, research isn't about realism. So we believe that research is an important part of any kind of game development, not just narrative. But this year we've seen a lot of the narrative design approaches really forefront research in interesting ways. So one of the main things we feel like highlighting here is that research can be raw material for artistic expression. So new dialects and slang can be inspired by real life historical language. Poetic memory mechanics can be inspired by clinical medical data. And endemic fantasy worlds can be based on real places and history. So knowing what your expressive palette is coming from the real world and how to use it is really key. Of course, you don't want to misrepresent things. It's something you want to be careful with, but you don't have to represent everything. You can be selective, really choose the things from the real world that you feel really serve your narrative design in interesting and expressive and unique ways. Game makers are artists, after all.
The other thing that we've seen through all of our presentations is that, the way in which they not innovate is not just a genre with a twist. Where you don't innovate matters just as much as where you do. So sticking with certain narrative conventions or game design conventions actually lets you go deep on how your innovative approach to narrative design transforms your game. So you can rely on things that players might be familiar with in order to bring something new to your game. In our examples, we had the immediate time travel that we saw in Cristales, and how it applies to all the aspects of a JRPG, how it ripples through the whole game. We have in-person co-op and how it transforms the mechanics of traditional adventure game puzzle design patterns. It just plays differently the way that is designed just by bringing this co-op into different computers. And we also see how walking sim conventions have set up the tone of a game. We know that if we're playing a walking sim, it's not going to be about empowerment. It's not an entitlement simulator. Quite the contrary. It's about losing power, losing capacities. But that's something that we're used to see in walking simulators. They're not going to bring us, this set of being the best or winning. Innovation doesn't mean inventing everything from scratch. So know what expectations and know what conventions you can lean on when you're making a game to highlight and deepen what's special about your game. And you can also use those conventions to guide players to know what they have to do without needing a special tutorial for everything.
And finally, find expressive limitations. So seemingly arbitrary limits imposed by chance or cost can actually wind up being the thing that makes your project special and your narrative design unique in particular. So one of the games found its core innovation just from the fact that the people who started making it, they didn't have Wi-Fi at the beginning, right? So, they may not have happened upon that core idea otherwise. One of the games had to rely on text for cost reasons, but actually, because of those reasons, they came up with interesting uses for text that they probably wouldn't have otherwise. One of the games found that by fixing time travel in space, which is usually something that doesn't happen with time travel mechanics in video games, usually it's more about butterfly effects and branching. But by saying all time travel has to show you what is happening on this exact spot in past, present, and future, players are actually able to experiment with it, to go deep on it and really parse it in ways that time travel almost never is in games. That's what makes it immediate. By focusing it on space in that way. So limits don't just focus you and make you more practical. They can actually give you ideas that you might not ever have happened upon or stumbled upon otherwise. This is one of the core ideas we keep coming back to year after year in the showcase, which is that unexpected problems have unexpected solutions.
So we want to thank you for your attention, and we also want to thank our awesome presenters for their insights and also for sharing their amazing work. We hope that you enjoyed these talks and that you were inspired to keep pushing the limits of game narrative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.